This is Third Eyesight. My name is Juan Francisco, and I'm a medium and tarot card reader. I've always been curious about the supernatural and the paranormal, and I'm here to share my stories and interview folks who want to share their own stories with us. Let's get to it. Happy New Year, everybody. Happy 2023. Can you believe it? 2023. I feel like when I was a kid in the 90s, the idea of a 2020 something just seemed so futuristic. I mean, 2000 something sounded really futuristic to me. I am so excited to go into another year of Third Eyesight. Now, obviously, the anniversary for Third Eyesight is in October, but October was so recent. It was 3 months ago, so I'm still going to call it a new year, another year of Third Eyesight. I hope that your holiday season has been lovely. I know some people do celebrate the holidays through to January. I know Three Kings Day happens in January, for instance, from what I remember as a kid. Although we never celebrated it, I know other people do. And I am feeling good about 2023 and Third Eyesight and my work as a medium and tarot card reader. And before we go into today's topic, which, yes, I know, psychic abilities and feeling lonely, it sounds like a downer kind of topic for a new year kind of episode, but I promise you, you're going to get something out of this episode if you either have an interest in exploring psychic abilities of your own, you are currently a psychic in practice, or you just love reading about psychic abilities. You love immersing yourself in the field. I promise this topic will be really helpful to you, as it has been to me as I've thought about it myself, for myself. But before we get into today's topic, I just want to reiterate, if you really love this podcast, please give it a review wherever you listen. It really helps to distribute this podcast, to amplify it across the platforms, whether it's Spotify, Google, Apple. It helps to expand the reach of the podcast so that more eyes can see it. And I also would love people who feel like they may be psychic or who experience supernatural events in their life. Either they've experienced them in the past or they're experiencing them on an ongoing basis, so they don't feel crazy and they have another podcast to listen to that helps them not feel crazy and helps them feel like they are not alone in exploring their psychic abilities or in figuring out what it is they're experiencing on the supernatural or paranormal level. Before we get into today's topic, I forgot to plan for this. So I'm going to click to Instagram and type in Instagram because I want to read a message I received from Amanda on Instagram. It was a really lovely message back in December. This is her message. I wanted to send a thank you, and I will get around to doing the review for your podcast episodes this week or this coming weekend. Thank you so much, Amanda. But you keep me company while working. Your podcast and your guests really click with me. What you speak about, how you speak about it. Thank you for touching on death and life after Earth. I will probably do a live shout out with my update this week sometime. Before I had started listening to your podcast, I had wanted to start my own podcast with witchy content and just life things. My almost adult son told me he got me a nice mic for Christmas so I can fulfill that dream of mine. You have helped me build more confidence in putting myself out there. Thank you, Juan. You have more than inspired me. Thank you so much, Amanda. And I really appreciate that message. And here I'm clicking back to my recorder. I am so grateful for listeners like you and people like you who support my podcast. And I encourage you to definitely start your own podcast and put yourself out there. If you feel that inspiration to do that, do it. And don't focus so much on how long am I going to do this for, or is this going to be worth the time? If you feel driven to do it, you're going to enjoy it. And don't focus on the longevity of it. Just do it. Don't worry about what people will think. Don't focus on so much on what people will think, and don't focus so much on where it will lead you to. Just focus on enjoying it. And I promise it's going to be so much fun. So start your podcast. And that's a message for anybody else. if you feel inspired to start your own project, to put yourself out there as a psychic practitioner, as a medium, as a healer, fill in the blank, to start your own podcast, do it. Do it. It's so much fun when you feel inspired to do something. And if my podcast inspires other people to put themselves out there in any way they'd like to, then my job, my goal has been done. Because that's the goal of the podcast, to inspire you, the listener, like Amanda, to inspire you to be confident in your abilities as a psychic, which I believe we are all psychic in different ways, as well as to help people feel comfortable knowing that they're not crazy just because they've experienced something supernatural, paranormal. They're not crazy. It's normal. All right. That's actually a really interesting segue into the topic for today's episode, which is practicing or exploring psychic abilities and feeling lonely. I'm going to first start with my own experience with this. So the more I have delved into practicing my abilities and honing in on those skills, I've noticed the more isolationist I've become with myself. I don't see people as often, and part of that is the podcast keeps me busy. And creating my social content, listen, social media, there's a reason social media coordinators are a role, a job in and of themselves. The role of social media coordinator, it is not easy to create content for social media and then to schedule yourself to post it and then to engage with people on social media so that you raise your chance of reaching new people on Instagram. It's a lot. The Instagram algorithm, it really makes people work. And it's not as easy as it used to be 5 years ago to reach people on Instagram. So I think that for someone like me who's busy creating this podcast, creating social media content on top of having a 9-to-5 job in public relations, I noticed myself being a little less social than I used to be. Now, in the past few months, I've been very social, mostly because I've been traveling a lot. I've been going out to drinks and dinner with people I hadn't seen for a while, since the summer. And I noticed in the last several months that I was feeling a little overwhelmed by all the social commitments I made. And I think that was a really big hint, a big clue or insight into just how much I wanted to isolate myself in the last few months of 2022. I got sick in December 2022 with a cold, and that forced me to be at home because I didn't want to pass along the sickness to anyone else in my life. So I just stayed put at home, and I isolated myself so that I wouldn't infect anybody else with my cold and my sinus infection. And for the first time in a long time, it was nice to feel bored. I felt bored at home, and it felt so nice. But I think also when it comes to practicing my psychic abilities and continuing to hone in on the skill that I have of mediumship and tarot card reading, especially mediumship, I just noticed that I'm a little more sensitive to the energies around me. So let's talk about 3 different ways that practicing psychic ability, or just having an interest in this topic. Maybe you're not practicing psychic abilities, you're not interested in honing that skill that you have. Maybe you're just reading up on it a lot, you're watching a lot of mediumship TV shows, or whatever it might be. Let's talk about 3 different ways that engaging with psychic abilities in any capacity can maybe make you feel a little bit lonely sometimes. So number 1, and this may be the most straightforward no-brainer, when we either engage with the idea of or directly practice our psychic abilities, there is this renewed awareness of the energies, the attitudes, the lifestyles around us in our social circles, at work, just among people, in the news, that we just don't feel like we click with as easily anymore. Let's say you have been practicing mediumship, and that means you are really focusing on your sensitivity to other people's energies. And because we are tapping into the energies of the spirit world in mediumship, that in and of itself has some hypersensitivity to it, because the spirit world is trying to make us feel what they felt when they were in the physical world, or what their loved ones feel, the person that we're channeling for. So there's a hypersensitivity there that's occurring, right? And then when we leave the reading as a medium and engage with people in the real world, there is this awareness of how people feel in different scenarios. Maybe in a reading, someone told me, a loved one on the other side told me that when the person's son wins a goal at a soccer game, they do a funny little dance, right? And that's to confirm that, yes, grandpa was there to see that funny little dance every time that son won a soccer goal, or in other countries, football. And because I got to experience that confirmation, right? Maybe this is being very nitty gritty granular, but maybe the next time I talk to someone at work about their son winning a soccer goal, or their daughter winning, getting a goal at soccer, it will bring me back to that moment. And then I'll start to think, I wonder if this coworker has a loved one on the other side who watches their. I know that's a really granular, everyday kind of life example, but it does come to mind for me sometimes. Because I've read a lot of people's grandparents, because a lot of people's grandparents have come through in readings for me, when people in everyday life bring up their grandparents who passed away, I start to wonder, like, are they still coping with that? How did they cope with the passing of their grandparent? These are things that I think about. And when I speak to people about loved ones of theirs that have passed outside of readings and that work, I personally do not decide to then tap into their energy and think, okay, is their loved one coming through? Like if a coworker says that their grandmother passed away 2 years ago, I'm not there thinking, okay, let's see if their grandma has something to tell me. I do not prefer to do that. I don't like it. I like to set a boundary, and I like to separate my professional 9 to 5 life from that. Now, if something comes through and it comes through on its own, then I have no control over that. It just comes through. But I will make a decision, a very, very calculated decision on whether to share it with the person. I decide not to do that at work, my 9 to 5, because I do not want to be judged for my ability. I do not want to be seen differently as a coworker for what I'm interested in. And some people may criticize me for that and say, oh, you should be proud across the board of your abilities, and you should not be afraid of people's judgment. Well, we live in a world where judgments like that can determine your livelihood, and I am not ready to do that yet. So there are coworkers of mine. Maybe there are 1 or 2 that know that I can do card readings and mediumship because I trust them, and because they also do the same, or they're interested in the same things, and they told me that. But otherwise, I will not read someone at work. But because I am used to doing readings outside of those readings, whether it's in my 9 to 5 work, or at the grocery store and someone tells me something, or just in a social group out and about with friends, someone tells me something, and I'll start to, because I'm so used to doing mediumship readings and being so interested in the field of mediumship, there's this added thought that I have when people share their personal feelings with me about loved ones of theirs who have passed, without them knowing that I'm a practicing medium. So there's this awareness of that makes it a little bit more, that I think makes me a little bit more sensitive to those types of conversations with people. A little more sensitive than I was before I started practicing mediumship. And at the same time, I think because I am so tapped into my psychic abilities more than I used to be, I think there's way more room for me to learn and to grow. But because I'm more tapped into these abilities than I was before 2 or 3 years ago, I have a little bit less tolerance for attitudes, lifestyles, energies that I just don't click with. People who seem to be very self-destructive, either in their words or their actions. And maybe for you, that is one thing that you've noticed, the more you've either read up on psychic abilities, watched TV shows on it, or practiced these abilities yourself. Number two, maybe you struggle with people who don't approve of your beliefs or your lifestyle when it comes to psychic abilities. I'm sure there are many people out there who have parents, siblings, friends, relatives who think this stuff is evil, that it's dangerous. I think there are more people, like when we feel we have the disapproval of people in our life regarding this type of topic, it's more because it tends to be because there is a religious belief system that that loved one holds on to that makes them believe that this is evil. There may be people that think it's dangerous work, like we're meddling with something, but maybe they won't be so disapproving of us. I feel like people are more likely to be disapproving when there's a religious belief that this is evil, that it's a sin, so to speak, as many people would put it out there. And that can feel very lonely. When you feel like the people you trust to love you, that you trust to love you unconditionally, don't approve of you. It seems they don't approve of you because you have these interests, because you believe in ghosts and you want to go on paranormal investigations, or you believe in the action of seeing a medium to connect with your loved ones, and they'll think that's not a good thing to do, that it's bad. That can feel very isolating and lonely. I'm very lucky that I do have people in my life, in my immediate family, my extended family, my friendships, that approve of this, of me doing all of this. I'm sure, I know that there are some people that think I'm being a little bit out there, maybe a little silly. Maybe they think it's silly sometimes, but it won't affect our friendship. Now, the moment that those people say to me, Juan, you're so silly doing the things you do, if they were to ever say that to me, I would very kindly shut that down and say, listen, just because it's silly to you doesn't mean it's silly to me, and I would appreciate it if you respected my beliefs and practices the way I respect how you don't believe in it. Better believe I would say that. At least I hope I would. I hope I would have the confidence to say that, because that's the way I feel right now. Right now, I feel like, yes, I would say that to somebody who disrespected my belief system. You don't have to agree with it. You don't have to like it, but just respect that I believe it, just the way I respect that you don't believe in it. But that being said, even those people that I would say that to, if they were ever to say something like I'm being silly for what I believe in or what I do, they do continue their friendship with me or their connection with me. There are many of us out there who don't have that privilege of having people in our life who want to stay connected to us because we have such an interest in psychic abilities or seeing psychics or watching and reading about them. So you're not alone. A lot of people feel that disapproval. And even though you feel lonely because of that disapproval, just know you're not alone in experiencing it, because there are so many people that do. Number 3, another way, and this, you may not expect this as one of the 3 points I'm bringing up. Another way we could be feeling lonely as people exploring or engaging with psychic abilities is because we're overexerting ourselves and maybe investing a little bit too much time in our day or in our week towards this field, this topic. This is going to sound very contradictory as someone like myself who praises and endorses practicing consistently our psychic abilities or learning more about it. I will be the first to say that sometimes too much of a good thing can be a disadvantage to us. And there are some psychics out there who say this, and I love it when they say this because it makes so much sense to me. We were born in human form. We are souls experiencing a human existence. If we were meant to always be fully tapped into the soul side of things, don't you think we would have never been born as humans to begin with? Wouldn't we have just stayed in the realm of spirit and never been born as humans? So if we're born into this human existence, we're meant to experience human things, whether they be human emotions, the ups and downs of human emotions, or activities in the universe, the physical universe on our planet that we can enjoy and experience. I am not someone who subscribes to the idea of restricting yourself from things like food, sex, roller coasters, Disney World, going to the movies, seeing movies, watching TV shows. I don't subscribe personally to the idea of restricting ourselves from these things to achieve a higher sense of enlightenment. Now, everything in moderation. Maybe sex becomes an issue for us because we feel like we're addicted to it. Maybe food becomes an addiction and we're eating a lot of foods that don't really satiate us and make us feel fulfilling our hunger, or we're overeating, or we are not eating enough for our bodies to sustain themselves rather. Maybe we're watching too many movies that make us feel sad. So only you can know what makes you feel, what level of activity makes you feel good about yourself and healthy. But I do think that this idea of devoting all of our time to psychic abilities can do as much harm as the good that can come out of practicing our abilities. I'm not trying to label here, what's good and what's bad. It's not about good and bad, right and wrong. It's about knowing when we're overexerting ourselves. We need a break from practicing our psychic abilities. It takes a lot of mental energy and physical energy sometimes to do readings for people or to practice these abilities. If only we could always be tapped in without feeling exhausted, but we have the part of us that gets exhausted. I think a part of it is our soul being gets exhausted a bit, but our human being gets exhausted. After some readings, I feel like mentally spent, or I feel actually physically tired. It doesn't happen all the time, but it does happen. So it's important to give ourselves breaks from practicing our psychic abilities. There's nothing wrong with being obsessed with something. If we're obsessed with a certain medium and we read their books, and nothing wrong with that. But only you know when something starts to feel a little overboard or a little bit, or feels exhaustive. Only you know that. This is a third way that sometimes we could feel lonely, is because we're devoting so much of our time, the majority of our time, towards the field of psychic ability, learning about it, doing it, and not devoting enough time to other things in our life, like our families, our friends, going out to try a new restaurant. We're meant to live life as humans and enjoy the human existence where we can enjoy it and when we can enjoy it. In the midst of all the suffering that sometimes we feel we go through, finding those moments in our human existence to enjoy it. So just to briefly recap, the 3 ways that we could be feeling lonely because of our psychic abilities or exploring and engaging with them is, number 1, being aware, a renewed awareness of energies, attitudes, lifestyles that we don't click with anymore. Maybe we never did and we never realized that we never did. But now we do, because we have this heightened awareness of ourselves and our energy. Number 2, struggling with relationships in our life with people that don't approve of our lifestyle as psychics or don't approve of our beliefs in psychic abilities. Number 3, overexerting yourself and devoting so much of your time to psychic abilities and this realm of work, and not devoting enough time to other things in your life that could bring you a lot of happiness too. And now I'm going to share 3 ways to address this feeling of loneliness. 3, not solutions, just ideas, personal recommendations. Number 1, find a spiritual community to join. If you feel like there are I'm sure there are, but if you discover or that there are other people in your community, whether digital or in person, that share your belief system, maybe not to the T, maybe not exactly what you believe in, but something similar in the same realm of things. Join them, get together with them, maybe message them if there are people online that share your beliefs. Message them and say hello and introduce yourself. and make a new friend. Join a group, join a spirit circle, join a tarot community that's online, join a mediumship circle that meets in person, or as is more common these days, online, an online mediumship group. Find people that will help you feel comfortable in your belief system because they share similar beliefs and that validate who you are as a person. And no, we don't need people to validate who we are, but I think there is something really lovely and self-loving about finding people who share similar beliefs to our own and being part of a community. There is something validating about feeling part of a community or a group of people, no matter what our interests are. Number 2, immerse yourself in books, in podcasts, in social media handles and profiles, accounts that relate to psychic abilities. If you're listening to this podcast, it's either because you are interested in the supernatural, all things supernatural, or you're interested in hearing about the ins and outs of psychic abilities and mediumship through interviews I do or just through my own episodes I record by myself, like this one. This is one podcast, one way that you can feel less lonely. Now, I'm not prescribing my podcast as a remedy for loneliness, but it's one way. There are so many other podcasts out there that focus on psychic abilities and mediumship and the supernatural. I recommend you to find more like this one that help you feel less lonely in what you're experiencing or what you're wondering about or what you're interested in. And find those books to read as well. There are so many books. Go to your local bookstore and go to what's commonly called the New Age spirituality section of a bookstore, or sometimes just the religious studies section of a bookstore, spirituality. It could have different names, but often it's called the New Age section when it comes to psychic abilities and the paranormal, supernatural. I wish it weren't called the New Age section. I wish it was just called spirituality, which some bookstores do label it as, but find that section. Whatever it's called, find it. Number 3, take the time you need to be with yourself. Yep. With yourself. I know this podcast is about challenging or more addressing the feeling of loneliness as psychics or people interested in psychic abilities. But I challenge you to take the time you need to take with yourself, to be with yourself, to spend time with yourself, not doing anything related to psychic ability or the supernatural. This goes back to the earlier point I made about when we feel maybe that we're investing a little too much time in one thing in our life and could be spreading that energy across other activities we could be enjoying. This is going to sound a little extreme, but as an example, I think it's a valid example. Have you given up biking? The biking that you used to love doing in your neighborhood because you're watching a lot of mediumship TV and you know you miss biking, but you just are so hooked to podcasts, TV shows. I just can't imagine. I mean, I'm sure I'm not trying to make fun of people, but I can't imagine being so focused on like a podcast or a TV show and giving up like biking or seeing friends. But hey, it's possible. I'll be honest. There are times where I feel like I'm overwhelming myself doing the podcast, or it's mostly when I do social media work. When I do social media content, I check my Instagram so often, and I have to admit, here and now, being fully honest, it is not a good thing. I check it way too often to see who's liked something new that I put up that day. It's too much. And I'm going to admit to you that that's something that I'm obsessed with, that I really want to draw back on, put my phone down a little more often, and go watch a funny TV show. Go out for a bike ride next summer when it gets a little way less cold. Maybe springtime. That would be great. Or go out for a walk. Go into my city and explore it a little bit, rather than focusing so much on laying on my couch, checking Instagram while watching TV and scrolling and refreshing and seeing who's liked my stuff. Now, listen, I'm not here on Instagram 2 hours straight or an hour straight just on Instagram, but I keep checking it. I keep going back to my phone while I'm watching TV. How about just watch TV? How about just go out for a walk and put your phone on airplane mode for a little bit, for 10 minutes while you're walking? Take the time that you need to spend with yourself while not focusing on psychic abilities, on psychic social media, and the like. So yes, this is about not feeling lonely. But this is not about never being alone. That's the balance I hope to strike for myself, is how can I be alone with myself without feeling lonely? How can I be with other people and not feel lonely? It's probably an age-old human question. It's a mystery, but I think there's a way to strike that balance. We just have to find it within ourselves. So to recap these 3 points, like I did the last 3 points, my recommendations for helping yourself to not feel as lonely as you are exploring your own psychic abilities or enjoying other people's psychic abilities. Number 1, find a spiritual community. Number 2, immerse yourself in things to read, listen, watch that help you feel less lonely in your interest in this field. And number 3, take the time you need to be with yourself away from those things. Don't invest all your time in just a podcast like this, in just a TV show like this, or in just this field. Spread that energy throughout other areas of your life that make you happy too. I hope that this podcast episode did help you feel less lonely and helped you feel like you have some next steps you can take, especially in time for this new calendar year of 2023. The main thing I really want you to feel through my podcast is not lonely. This podcast helps me feel not lonely because although it's mostly me talking into a microphone to nobody at the moment, I know people are going to listen to this. And I've had people like Amanda, whose message I read at the beginning of the episode, who tell me that this helps them feel less lonely. And by them telling me that, it helps me feel like I'm not alone in doing this podcast work. There are people listening. There are people getting something out of it. But also, this is hard to think about as someone who is a creative like myself. If a month from now, I learn that nobody has been listening to my podcast for the last month, 0 people, I don't think I would stop recording. I would keep going. Because speaking this out, speaking my thoughts out into existence, into the ether, helps me feel less lonely. I'm here recording this, spending time with myself, recording this, with the hopes that someone's listening, with the expectation that someone's listening. But if I learn one day that no one has been listening to my podcast for a month, I would keep going because this is an activity for me, recording this, saying all this right now. There are things I can learn from what I'm saying. It's not just for me I'm not here just as a teacher role for you listening. I'm learning things as I talk into this podcast microphone. I'm learning things as I interview people who are psychics and mediums, because they have something to teach me. Even if we're talking about a topic that I've read up on before, that I've experienced firsthand before, there is always something I can learn from the things that I research, the things that I come up with as recommendations for you, from things that other people can share with us, me and you, the listener, through an interview that I do. So yeah, I would continue this podcast even if I knew no one was listening, because it sort of acts as like a personal diary sometimes when I speak into the microphone on my own. Or I'm just having a wonderful conversation with somebody who can share their own personal experience of mediumship or the supernatural or psychic abilities. I forgot how I got into that line of thought just now, but I'm going to leave it at that. I feel comfortable leaving it at that. I hope that this helps to launch you into an exciting start to 2023, and keep your messages coming, keep your comments coming. I love to hear your thoughts on the podcast episodes, whether you're commenting on the YouTube version of the episode or you're sending me a message on Instagram or an email. And here is to another year together. And here's to, a la the podcast episode, the last podcast episode of 2022, episode number 50. Here is to you exploring your intuition and psychic abilities and being present with yourself and knowing when you need to give yourself a break and when you need to give yourself a breath of fresh air. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.